I apologize. I should have hit the recording button sooner than we did. And let me also hit the live transcript button, which will hopefully be able to give you, for any of those of you who need to be following this visually, the appropriate transcript information. Another thing I want to highlight here is, we look at what your courses are, but we also look at what's not there. So, nobody expects you to necessarily have prior public health training. Like if you are a public health undergraduate, that's great. Most people come to public health from other perspectives, and that's also fine. But like with the quantitative stuff, I'm always at least curious what it is that led someone to public health. And I'm going to transition here from talking about your academic record to what's in some sense the more important piece of this, which is your motivation for seeking public health training in the first place. Like, so if I want to understand how your past academic record connects to where you want to go forward. For some of you, it's going to be obvious. And for some of you, you may be pivoting, right? You may have discovered something in your life, in your world, that is making you really interested in public health. And that's okay. But it also needs to be acknowledged. So the main thing, probably my single most important advice for applicants is this: help us to understand why you want to come to us. For some of you, that's going to be something you found in your prior academic training. You were always moving towards health, for example, or you took a really powerfully influential course that steered you towards us. Great, tell us about that. For some of you, your motivation for pursuing public health or for going into health behavior and health education is grounded in something in your life experience. That could be where you grew up. That could be the disparities that you observe in the communities you live in or work in. It could be something about your own identities that is very salient to you, that has given you an insight into the work that needs to be done in the world to improve health and to improve health equity. Whatever that motivation is, try to share it with us. We are really, in many sense, open to being convinced. That's why the title of this webinar is "Convince Us That You're Ready." Like, convince us that you know why it is you want to go into public health. You know what it is about graduate training that you are looking for, and that you are ready to succeed when you do that. That's a pretty broad statement, but honestly, that's really where we're looking for. So broad general statements about, the world needs public health are less motivating, are less clear than a real insight into your journey. What is it about that is leading you to go down this pathway? And there's not necessarily a single answer. I see people who want to go into healthcare. I see other people who want to address the needs of a particular population. I see other people who are just fundamentally motivated by one particular health issue, let's say infant mortality. Maybe that's because they know someone who was affected by that, but that's the thing that drove their interest in public health. Whatever it is, that's the thing that I think we really want you to share with us. Now, when you do that, hopefully you can build connections between your interests and our department, right? Take a look at our courses, take a look at our faculty online. And if you see connections, right? If you look at the faculty list and you see somebody who's doing really cool work, bring that in, talk to us about that. Show your excitement in that connection. Now, don't make it up, right? You don't have to be referencing particular faculty or courses or themes, but hopefully if we're a good fit for you, there's things that you've already seen in our department, in our school, in our work that made you think Michigan is the right place for you to be. Share that with us. that really is the things that will make us sit up and take notice. Like, oh, this person would love to work with them because they're really passionate about, and I'll just pick something here randomly. They're really passionate about HIV prevention. Great, we have faculty who are really passionate about HIV prevention. So that connection gets made. We can understand why you want to come here, et cetera. Now, another piece here in the broad application is your work experience. And again, I'm going to reflect the reality that probably amongst all of you right here, right now, some of you have, years, perhaps more of work experience that relates in some form to health. And others of you may not, right? You may have not had that opportunity. That could be because of competing demands in your academic pursuits. It could be because of competing demands in your life. Not everybody has equal opportunity to pursue different types of work backgrounds or job experience, et cetera. Whatever you have, feel free to share, but don't feel like there is only one pathway to us. Like, I understand if you've got lots of experience, tell me how that experience is shaping your trajectory. What brings you to us? And if that's different than what you started out doing when you first left undergrad, that's okay, but help us understand how it's bringing you to us now. And if you're like, I haven't had the opportunity to do X, Y, or Z, but I'd really like to, then share that too. Right? Those are the kinds of ways that can help us understand how your experience, whether it's paid or not, whether it's a volunteer, whether it's a little bit of an intensive experience or a long period of engagement with a particular topic, but just a little bit at a time, whatever it is that's bringing you to us, that's what we want to see. And then the last piece I'll say before I just pause and start to throw this open for questions, because I'd really rather spend most of this session hearing your questions, which Jackie will be monitoring in the chat, and then responding to them. So as I'm continuing to talk and wrapping this up, please feel free to put questions into the chat, and she'll be following that, and we can pose them, and we'll have a bit of a back and forth here. But there is some questions about recommendations. Recommendations are a key part of the application process, and we want to hear from people who know you well. Now, since this is a graduate school application, recommendations need to speak to your abilities as a student, as an academic. So getting some from academic references, professors, et cetera, is in general a good thing. That said, I also acknowledge the reality that, for some people, some of the most important references are people who know you from other contexts. Like, I'll take a particular example here. If somebody has been working at the Peace Corps, I want to hear from their Peace Corps supervisor, not just their academic references. If you've been volunteering for a long period of time at a particular community organization, showing commitment towards whatever that organization's goals are, I want to hear from them too. But it shouldn't be all those non-academic stuff. We do need to hear from references who can speak to your abilities as a student. And if that's a challenge, because say you've been out of school for a long period of time, we can make adjustments for that. But in general, we would expect to be seeing at least a few of the references, and generally most of the references from academic sources. So let me pause there, actually. I've just given a sort of pretty broad overview of what we're looking at. You'll notice that I didn't give you any sort of hard GPA cutoffs or you must have done this particular prerequisite course, because there are no hard GPA cutoffs and there are no hard prerequisite course requirements, et cetera. So that's the kind of holistic review process that we subscribe to at HVHE. And before we wrap up, I do need to say one last thing. You'll notice one thing that I did not talk about this year, which is standardized test scores. The School of Public Health at the University of Michigan has made a decision for this academic year that we will not be accepting standardized test scores for the purposes of admission. And we will not be, to the extent we can, avoid looking at any that happen to be provided as part of the general applications process. So I'm not talking about standardized tests because we will not be using standardized tests as part of our admissions review process. So, so I see a question here from Sydney, spoke about including professors or research that interests us in the program, but what if we're passionate about some of the foundations that Michigan prides itself on, such as diversity and inclusion? Diversity and inclusion is a public health topic from my standpoint. Certainly, this school and our department is deeply committed to health equity in all of its forms. So to me, that is aligning with the interests of this program. Now, it's one thing to talk broadly about, I think diversity is important, and it's another thing to talk very concretely about what do you care about in the space of diversity? What are the disparities that you want to be addressing? So, being concrete about what your interests and what drives you towards that interest is important, but absolutely bring that in. That's part of what brought you to us. Let's see. Would you accept or read an extra letter of recommendation? I'm going to punt that to Jackie. Do we have, I don't think we have specific rules. So it's three letters are required?
3 letters are required. We'll start to review when there are 2 letters. I think you can submit more than one, or more than 3, and maybe one more. I wouldn't go any more than that though, because there's a lot of reading to be done in your application. So if it's really going to give a boost to your application, maybe add one more recommendation, but other than that, I would try to stick to the 3 because I think that may be the limit that you can submit.
And I would say, to the extent that this is even a question, that the extra letter writer should be providing something that isn't already being provided by the other references. Like just another professor is not actually that helpful, but somebody who maybe provides a really different perspective on you might be. So I got a question here from Brian about the transferable skills that HBHE places high value on. Yes. I'm not being facetious here. I'm literally meaning transferable skills are valuable because they're transferable skills. Like I care about communication skills, right? My personal research interests are in health communication. So, I remember an applicant who was doing filmmaking and I was like, cool. You want to apply filmmaking to health behavior change? That would be really interesting. I've seen other people bring in leadership roles, whether that's leadership in extracurricular contexts or leadership in their organizations, et cetera. That's important. Anything that makes you a better professional is part of what will make you interesting to us. All right, so that is wide open.
You see the one about dual degrees?
Yeah, so for those interested in dual degrees programs, should we treat the applications as 2 separate entities or should we discuss the other application and program? Well, first of all, let's be clear. You do have to have a separate application to each program, right? There is not a combined application process. The way we manage dual degrees here, each program has its own application and you reviews applicants separately. And so there's, you have to meet all the requirements of each program and look for what they're looking in and interested in. Can you talk about that? Sure. But usually I would say talk about it in the context of your holistic vision of your future. Like if you want to be somebody who is interested in, let's say, community-based social work and community-based public health, the overlap between those programs is relatively straightforward. Sure, let's talk about that. I've got another current advisee who is doing a dual degree with the business school. They're interested in thinking about this from a business standpoint. They have experience with health management. And so when they applied to HBHE, they talked about how they wanted to leverage their business interests as skills that would be relevant for serving the broader population health goals that we're interested in HBHE. Absolutely bring that in. But always know that first and foremost, you must show us that you are interested in HBHE, right? Don't ever apply for a dual degree just to get a second degree, right? That is one piece of advice I will give you, right? Dual degrees can be a valuable thing if you really want the combination. But sometimes we see people who are like, oh, well, I'm really just interested in X, but I guess I'll also do this other degree program because then I'll get 2 degrees. Honestly, I have almost never seen that turn out really well because they're really only interested in one of those degrees. Sometimes it's us, sometimes it's a different program. But don't just pursue stuff because it's there. If you do have that common interest, then a dual degree can be great. And then you should talk about it from that holistic perspective.
There's somebody here talking about, when you've been out 3+ years,
Yeah.
Is it really academic that you need?
So for someone with multiple years of experience after you finish your last academic training, right? Look at this from our perspective. Your work experience is really important. Whatever you've been doing, I would presume and expect that it would be somehow steering you towards us, like something about your experience is leading you to come to us. At the same time, we also need to make sure that you are ready to be a student again. And I've advised a number of students who came back to graduate school after a number of years out, and most of them sort of reflected on, yeah, that's a transition, right? It's a different life to be a student than it is to be working full time. So speak to that in the context of your record, right? If your academic record is really strong and we're going to be able to look at that and go, yeah, I'm pretty sure they'll still be a good student. Okay. If there's challenges in your academic record, then speak to that affirmatively. Like, how has your work experience, for example, worked your quantitative skills or your writing skills or your, intervention skills, right? Sometimes your work experience can speak to the things that you will be doing as a graduate student, and you should bring that in.
Brian, do you see the question about to meet the priority deadline, do SOFIS applications have to be submitted by December 1st or submitted and verified by that date?
I see that. I was going to pass that one over to you. I don't know what the answer to that is. I thought the answer was it was submission rather than submission and verified.
Yeah, but I think we want to also be clear that just because you don't make it by that December 1st deadline, you're still going to be reviewed. You're still going to be considered for scholarships. It's just that the earlier we get them in, the faster that you'll have a decision.
Yeah. And, that's a good point, Jackie, because, we just speaking for this year, we accepted applications considerably later into into the year for our upcoming, for the class that's starting right now. That the challenge with being a little bit later is that obviously you're coming later in the review process, and because at least a significant amount of the scholarship decisions may be made before you get to the point where your application is accepted. But I would never want anybody to say, whoops, it's too late. No, please do reach out to us, do submit. If you have any question, please reach out to Jackie. The answer is almost assuredly going to be, yes, please send in your stuff. We'd be happy to look at it.
There's another question here about, let's see. Oh, I am interested in health behavior, but does it cover all areas like children and adults?
So, yes. I think our definition of health behavior and health education covers the full range of populations. And by that, I mean children. I'm working right now with one of my HVHE faculty colleagues on a grant proposal looking at child environmental health. So environmental health issues that have particular impacts on children. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, I had a graduate student who was particularly interested in older adults and their driving decisions and the risks that they face in terms of when to stop driving and when to continue driving, et cetera. And obviously everything in between falls into that space. So yes, we are interested in a variety of ages, a variety of populations. geographic populations, racial ethnic populations, people with particular health conditions. Yes, yes, yes.
A bit in line with Ashley's question, would an academic letter from a community college professor be acceptable if we have begun taking classes recently after being out of school for a while?
Not only acceptable, but it would be highly encouraged. That professor who you are working with is, in some sense, the most proximal person who has been working with you in an academic context. We very much would love to hear from that person. Let's see, I'm going back through the list here. I see a question from somebody about international students sending their reference letters. Jackie, do you have a sense as to how to answer that one?
Yes, so everyone applies to the MPH program through the SOFIS application. And within the SOFIS application, you would enter the recommenders that you would like letters from. And then you put in their contact information, and then your recommenders will receive a notification, and they will upload the letter to the SOFIS, and then we'll receive everything in one package. Does that make sense?
I saw you replied to somebody in the chat about certificates. I did want to say one other thing about that. We offer a variety of different certificate programs within the School of Public Health and within the university that public health students may be eligible for. I would not want anybody to feel like getting an extra certificate is sort of an obligation. Right, that you're not doing it right if you don't get a certificate. Sometimes certificates are a great fit for people. Whether that's, I speak to the ones that I happen to be most connected with, health informatics or genetics, public health genetics, things like that, global public health. For other people, that doesn't align with their interests, and that's totally fine. One of the great strengths of our department's program, at least at the master's level, and to some degree also at the PhD level, is the degree of flexibility that is built into the curriculum. People have a lot of opportunity to take elective courses to shape the curriculum in ways that align with your particular interests. And if that aligns with a pre-existing certificate, cool. And if it's not, then that's okay too, because part of what we think is important is that you can craft an experience that speaks to the skills that you need, the topics you are most interested in, the application areas that you most want to be working on.
Can I just piggyback off of that? Because I do have questions about this quite frequently with certificates. Don't just do a certificate to do one. Just like Brian said, don't just add a degree to add it, because I'm not for sure that's really going to benefit you. I've had many conversations with students that feel like, oh, because this is an option, I should do that. And it's like, well, if you have no interest of really working in that field, I'm not sure that's going to really benefit you in the future.
I see a note here from Laura. Are we encouraged to submit a letter of recommendation from an internship supervisor? It's certainly acceptable. Whether I would say encouraged to, I think, how does this fit into your larger set of recommenders? Like, if that person can speak to your interests in a particular domain, got to know you really well, can show the depth of your commitment, great. But I wouldn't want you to swap out a really good academic letter just because that you wanted to get the internship thing in there. Again, we're looking for the best combination of materials to help us really understand two things: your fit with us in terms of your motivation and the direction you're going, and your ability to be successful. And make sure that you don't go too far in either direction, because we need both pieces to feel comfortable with you as an applicant to our programs.
Here's a question from Dale. Does this program offer flexibility for those who are working in a public health/science field?
Now, do you mean flexibility in the context of timing, or do you mean flexibility in the context of curriculum? And while Dale's trying to getting to respond, and you can unmute yourself or you can put in the class timing. So our program is designed, the HPHE MPH program is designed as a residential program where students are working, are committed full-time to this program. in general, I'm not going to say never, in general, it is relatively difficult to do this on a part-time basis. I do know there have been some students who, for example, started full-time and then finished up in a part-time way. But we are not, this program is not designed with somebody who is working another job on a full-time basis. That said, I also should remind you of the Population Health Sciences Master's Program that the School of Public Health offers, which is designed for that purpose, right? So that is a fully online program. It's offered at the school level rather than at the department level. It's a fully online program where the courses are done in a sort of short burst sequence structure, with the live sessions done via Zoom in the evenings. I actually teach a course, actually will be teaching my second course in that program next term. And that is an option for people who need to be thinking about working in their public health training while continuing to have other work responsibilities, et cetera. Now, in that context, in the context of that program, you're more constrained in terms of your courses. There are some HPHE courses that are offered and you can have some orientation there, but you don't have the flexibility to really tailor the elective courses that you're taking to nearly the same degree that you do in the primary HPHE program that we're talking about today. So I see something about international scholarships. The international, the departmental scholarships, which I say separate thing than any financial aid question, but the departmental scholarships are considered in a holistic way. So all the students that are applying are considered at the same point in time, and we move forward. So international students as being considered in that are considered in that process as well.
Brian, we have a good question from Jennifer. She wants to know, how would you differentiate between the statement of purpose and reflective essay? What should be included in each, not to sound repetitive?
So let me actually remind myself which one is which. The reflective statement is the 500-word one and the statement of purpose is the long one. Okay, Jackie's nodding her head. Okay. So the statement of purpose, i.e. the long one, the essay, is, I think, the place in which you bring in your motivations, your background, the story of what's bringing you to us, your hopes, your connections with the department, et cetera. The reflective essay is less about sort of the classic application essay and more about an opportunity for you to, mention who you are as a person and issues that we might need to be aware of in the context of considering your application. So how do you contribute to our cohort as a person? And also it's the place where you should bring up the things that may be complicated about your record, whether that's, I see statements like, I also wanted to comment on my relatively poor academic performance during my sophomore year. The following things were happening in my family, and I really struggled with this particular issue. I learned a lot from that. And then, as you can see from my last couple of years, was able to be much more successful at the end of my academic career, right? That stuff goes into the reflective essay, right? Acknowledge any weaknesses in your record, things that we need to be aware of, and address them there. That is what that statement is for. Anything more you want to add to that, Jackie?
I think you hit on everything. If I remember, there was one thing I wanted to add, but it's kind of escaped me at the moment. So I'll come back to that later.
So there's a question here about the recommendation letters and SOFAs. I think this is one that you probably know better than I do, Jackie. You submit the letters, go to SOFAs, and then all of the letters are going to all of the programs that are being applied to, right? So it's not that you have to do the letters separately for each program.
Correct. Let's see, Emily's asking, if we submitted our application early, what is the time range when we can expect to hear back?
Put us on a spot here. So first of all, you need to understand that there are many steps that are involved in this process, ranging from certification of, the transcripts that you have been submitted, making sure that all the application materials are complete. They then get uploaded to our system and we have to manage them. And then the review process starts on our end. So this is not something that can unfold super quickly, unfortunately. I'm going to share what we hope, but I also want you to not guarantee anything because there are multiple hiccups that can happen along the way, and some applications move faster than other ones do. And that's not a reflection of your likelihood of being accepted. That's simply a reflection of certain times there are issues that make things slower to get into our hands versus quicker. Our hope is that we are, seeing early applications coming soon into our hands as faculty and into Jackie's hands so that we can start to be making decisions. Some people may get answers before the end of the year, although I certainly would not want anybody to expect that. We tend to get the burst of stuff landing in our lap to be worked on right around the beginning of the year. And so we're doing a lot of application review work in January, moving on to early February. Now, our goal is to try and turn this stuff around to you as fast as possible, right? We do not sit on decisions and wait to tell you. We will give you the information as quickly as we can. If you are, for some reason, wanting to know the status of your application, you can always reach out to us and that's what Jackie's there for. Sometimes that's going to be because there's been an issue or something's moving slow. Sometimes it's just been because we're overloaded, but we are moving as fast as we can. I will also note that we do not link the decision for acceptance with the scholarship decision, that those things are happening at separate points in time. So if you get a letter saying acceptance and you're like, wait, did I get a scholarship or not? That's not because the answer is done. It's because we're making the acceptance decision at a different point in time than the one when we're making the decision about scholarships.
One thing I wanted to add about with the applications, when you submit them to SOFIS, they verify everything before it's submitted to the schools that you're applying to. And I think somebody asked that, can you apply to more than one program in SOFIS? Yes, for a fee. And that's the thing, most students or applicants will submit to 2 to 5 schools, and that's the beauty of SOFIS, is because you only have to upload your supporting credentials. Sorry for that that was my husband coming home from work. Sorry about that. You only have to submit the credentials once, and then you will go ahead and they will submit them to all the different schools that you're applying to. But like I said, it is for a fee. And once they verify everything, we will then get the application. And the turnaround time usually is from the moment you submit, it could be about 2 weeks before we get it here in the school. And then I then disperse it to the reviewers.
So transcripts, yes, we do need those transcripts. Things are, for those of you who may be trying to report academic work, whether that's because you are from outside the US, whether that's because you are a US citizen, but you did academic work outside the US, or because you're applying from outside the US, those issues, we absolutely can handle them, but they take longer. So it's just a little bit more complicated to manage that process. Other questions? Let's see. Have I missed anything?
Yes, transcripts are always required. Letters of recommendation, like I said, at minimum, we have to have 2 letters before SOFIS will send them to us. And if the third one comes in, it'll just show up for us for review. I'm trying to read here.
So Agnes just posted a question. Are some of the programs funded either partially or fully? So let me speak briefly about this. The application process is for admission to the program. We manage this as a scholarship process. So some students will be offered scholarships, most of which are partial at different levels of degree, coverage of the tuition costs. That process is made based upon the set of applicants that we have, as well as the available resources to the school. And our review process for scholarships, again, is a very holistic process, but it is a separate process from the admission process. So we are looking both at someone's record and their work experience and who they are and where they're coming from and all of the things that contribute to the diversity of our cohort as we are thinking about scholarships. That usually scholarship offers are mostly, but not all, mostly done in February-ish. But again, it varies from year to year, in part on how the ebbs and flows of the application process unfold. So Laura asked a question here about international students whose English is not their native language, but attended a school in the US. Are you still required to submit TOEFL scores? I honestly don't know that one, Jackie. Are they required to submit TOEFL scores?
If you complete a degree in the US from or from an English speaking university, I don't believe you're required to submit TOEFL. Only if your undergraduate degree or other degree is from an international school that is not English speaking. Does that make sense?
I think that's right. If we don't have that, yes, TOEFL scores are compulsory because we are looking at your English proficiency as another marker of, are you going to be able to be successful within our program? So minimum score. This is I don't know, Jackie, whether the school has a published statement on this. Do you know?
I believe they do in the admissions area of the website. And I believe the score is 100, but I have to go back and look myself because I think there's different forms of the TOEFL that you can take now, different types of testing. So I may have to go back myself and take a look.
That's consistent with my memory, was that there was an expectation of a TOEFL score of 100, but there was flexibility in the admissions chair, i.e. my hands, in terms of how that is interpreted. And we do look at, for example, the balance between the different subscores in terms of writing versus speaking versus listening, et cetera. Ideally, we want to see a balanced understanding and not someone who may have particularly strong reading skills, but be much weaker, say, in speaking skills or listening skills. Has scholarship funding been impacted due to COVID-19? As far as I know, no. However, there's certainly plenty of uncertainties in the world, let alone in the particular situation at the University of Michigan. We are currently believing that there is going to be substantial scholarship monies available. I cannot guarantee that, if only because the whole university's budget picture is still at the whims of what will happen over the course of the next 6 months, at the whims of the state legislature with Michigan, who allocates funds to the university, et cetera.
Did you see the next question?
Yeah, so scholarships are offered before you come. So we will make scholarship offers to students, again, not exactly at the moment of acceptance, but before you make the final decision to come, most of our scholarship funds will already have been offered so that people will know, I'm just going to make an example here. I was offered a half scholarship, so half of the tuition cost would be covered by a scholarship, and you would be able to make your decision knowing that. We do not go through a process of, we certainly don't go through a process of weeding students out or of doing, there are some scholarships or some monies that are available, particularly for students who are already here. But for the most, scholarships are offered beforehand. So the test question here, let me just reiterate in case you didn't get that before, we talked about it before you came. For this year, the University of Michigan School of Public Health is not accepting standardized test scores as part of the admissions review process. GRE, MCAT, regardless, we are not accepting. And so that answers that question.
Hey, Brian, since there's not any questions at the moment and we're starting to run out of time, and we forgot to push the record button in the beginning.
Yeah.
For those, since we're going to be maybe sending this out to people or having it available on our website, do you want to kind of go over the whole piece about the quantitative ability? Because that's a lot of the questions that I'm receiving recently.
Yep. So let me just ask this last question from Agnes. No, there's not a separate application process for scholarships. It's just we do a two-phased review. So let me recap the stuff that I covered right at the beginning in case you're just watching this on the recording or you came in late. So the main things that we look at is your academic record, but not at a cumulative GPA level. We look at your courses. We look at your trajectory. We look and see, did you have a struggling semester, but then you got better? What kinds of courses did you take? And we have a very broad conception of what is relevant to public health. Like we see students with hard science backgrounds, we see students with anthropology backgrounds, and everything in between. But we do care that you show that you are a good student, that you are capable of performing academic work to standard. And if you have struggled with that, to show that you are dealing with those challenges and overcoming them. We also, now HPHE is not a quantitatively focused program, right? We are not biostatistics, but all master's public health students have to take biostatistics, and we do expect some level of foundational quantitative skill. Sometimes that's easily visible in your record. You took math classes, or you took statistics classes, or you took physics classes. Those we will look at to see how well did you do. Again, not because you have to have A's in everything, but because if you're really struggling in those math classes, that's something that we will notice. If your quantitative preparation is missing, you never took math classes, not that great, or out of date, we strongly encourage you to consider taking a college algebra class now. Do so at your current institution. Do so at a local community college, as long as it's an accredited institution. One, it will better prepare you for what you will face when you are here. And two, we will look for that. Like, if I have a question about somebody's quantitative preparation and they say in their essay, or they say when Jackie emails you, oh yeah, I thought about that, so I'm taking a college algebra class. We're like, 2 thumbs up, send us the grade. That's what we're looking for. We will sometimes make admission conditional on completion of such a course to a reasonable standard. But the sooner you start recognizing that deficit and addressing it, the better. And then the other major thing that we look at is what I best put as fit, your motivation. What brought you to us? That could be because of courses you took. It could be because of where you grew up. It could be because of your work experience. It could be because there's a particular issue that has been part of your life. But whatever it is that is bringing you to public health, and in particular to our program, we want to know about that. And the question here is, can you show us why you want to be here? And can you show us that you're ready to do the kinds of work that you will do when you're here? And there are many different pathways that bring people here. There is no one, you have to have a certain GPA, you have to have taken this prerequisite. Doesn't exist for our program. But we do care that people, have backgrounds that make us feel like they're going to feel like they're in the right place when they get here, and they're going to be able to be successful when they're here. I'm seeing a couple things in the chat right now about, does this count for the quantitative prep? I think the question comes down to, what does your transcript say that is your experience? And what do you say about your work experience? Like, there are some jobs that are doing, let's say, statistical analyses on a regular basis. And if you're doing that kind of work, that's relevant background. There are other jobs that might have similar job titles that don't. just be honest with us about what your work experience or your past course backgrounds have given you from the standpoint of skills. And I will say this, there's two related but separate questions here. There's our evaluation of you from the standpoint of acceptance, and there's what's going to help you get ready to be here. Even if you took math classes before and you did pretty well on them, go, and if you're not really confident of your math ability, go take an online algebra refresher, like go to Khan Academy, go to one of these online things. We don't need to see it necessarily, but you will be ready. You will be better ready to be here if you go and refresh those skills. Again, there's not a single right answer of this will count or this won't count, but the more that you can explain to us what your quantitative background is, just like the more that you can explain to us what your, passion is, the better we'll understand whether we think you're ready to be here. And Ashley asked a question here, algebra course versus a statistics course. Both are useful for us for evaluation purposes, but if push comes to shove and you need to do more work now, the recommendation that we have been clearly given from the biostatistics people is do the algebra. What we need is the foundational skill, not the particular application of that skill in the context of statistics. They can teach you the statistics. Where people struggle is if they don't have the foundational math. All right, it's 5 o'clock now. If there's any last questions, I'm happy to quickly respond to them. And so I'll keep talking while people might be typing. But in the meantime, I want to thank you for coming. I'm really looking forward to reading your applications and hopefully seeing you here at the University of Michigan in the future. And if something comes up as you're working on your application or after you submitted the application, please reach out to us, right? Jackie is the point of contact. Please make use of that. We know that everybody's situation is different. We know that sometimes there's difficult choices that you want to make. Should I talk about this or not? Should I bring in this or not? We can help you with that. So please don't feel like you have to sort of do this all on your own. That's what we're here for. With that, I think we will, why don't we close off the recording, Jackie?